Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to Embrace the Question. Hope you're all doing well. This is the last of our Genesis exploration in Bible study with me. We are in Genesis chapter 50. And this one is pretty dramatic. It's the end of the story of Jacob. We're really at the end of the story of Joseph. But more than that, we're at the end of the story of the beginning. The end of the beginning. How poetic is that? But this is the last of the patriarchs. Jacob was our connection to Adam, if you will, because if you look at the early history, the historical timelines, then we discover that Jacob's life overlapped Shem's life. Now, Shem was one of the three sons of Noah, and legend has it that when Jacob was running from Esau, he fled to the house of Shem for a season. Now, whether or not that really happened or not, it could have, according to the timeline, because Shem lived to be, I believe, over 600 years old. He was, again, one of the last pre-Diluvian people alive. I guess he would have been the last. Interestingly enough, Genesis doesn't really give us good detail about the end of life for some of these pre-Diluvian people. I mean, it doesn't spend a lot of time on their death. It talks about their life and then it moves on. And I guess that's what's important. But still, there is just something really fascinating about the connection between the world before the flood to just the thread through Noah that connects us to that. And I'm just fascinated by it. Can you imagine? And I believe that dinosaurs roamed in that early period, the pre-Diluvian period. I think they were in the garden. Okay, that's me. Whether they were or not, there were things that those guys saw that have never been seen since. And Shem would have represented our last connection. And therefore, Jacob, in this time, in Genesis 50, he's the only one that would have remembered Shem. So it's like the hand that shook the hand. You know, I think that's just amazing. But let's get started and take a look at this, what I do refer to as a very dramatic chapter. Before we start, get some coffee. Do I really need to tell you again? This is good stuff. Solwaycoffee.com. Get you some K-cups if that makes it easier. He can ship them right to your door, and hey, then you're good on the Keurig for a while, all right? So, highly recommend it. Let's do Genesis 50. All right, here we go. Genesis 50, verse 1. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Now, just as a catch-up, the reason this is happening is at the end of Genesis 49, Jacob is finished blessing his sons. He's pulled his feet up into his bed. He's leaned back. And he's passed on unto the unseen realm. All right, so Joseph, he's been there. He's watched all of this transpire as well as his brothers. Verse 2, and Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his brother, or his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. I would not have been able to remember that detail. To me, that's really something that's way out of the ordinary because Jacob's not an Egyptian. Now, we know that Joseph was embalmed. He's put in a coffin. At least I knew that from my previous studies. But all that to say, I kind of halfway think of Joseph as an Egyptian. He was a big-time Egyptian official, second only to Pharaoh, right? Jacob is more of a figurehead. He's the father of the king almost in Egypt. He's the father of the savior, of Joseph. But they know that they're not going to bury Jacob, so they need to embalm him. Okay. What's interesting about the embalming is that we're talking about Israel. So it's a picture, if you can imagine there being a picture hidden. But Israel dies and is preserved for a season. So Israel he's going to leave the scene, but he's not going to completely leave the scene, if you know what I mean. He's going to be preserved, embalmed. It reminds me of Israel disappearing. I mean, Israel fizzles out after the Roman Empire. It's not a thing. It wasn't a thing in Jesus' day. Israel wasn't really a nation. It was an occupied territory. Okay? But it was preserved and became yet a thing once more in 1948. How interesting is that? So Israel here is embalmed. It's preserved. Verse 3, let's take a look. 40 days were required for the embalming process. 40 days. For that is how many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. I read a commentary. It says the time length for weeping, for mourning over an Egyptian royal figure is 72 days. So the fact that they mourned for 70 days means that Jacob was highly regarded by the Egyptians. That's really interesting to think about because, we didn't have the social media thing going. How did everybody know about Jacob? Everybody surely knew about Joseph, but how did they learn to love Joseph's father? He must have been exalted much. He must have traveled throughout Egypt in order to be shown to the people, I'm guessing. This is really just thinking out loud for me because I wonder about things like this. Why did they love him as much as they did? I mean, he was greatly loved by his family, obviously, but the Egyptians grew to love him. That's good stuff. Okay, verse 4. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, I'm about to die. In my tomb that I hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there shall you bury me. Now therefore let me please go and bury my father, then I will return. All right, verse 6. Pharaoh answered, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. Think about this. They're emptying the royalty from the entire land of Egypt on a pilgrimage back to Canaan to bury Jacob. And the Canaanites are going to see that, and they're going to talk about that, and we're going to get to it in a minute. But what's interesting about this is that Jacob owned a plot of land. Really, it was owned by Abraham. Abraham purchased it to bury Sarah, and that's where he himself was buried, in Canaan. So he owned land in Canaan, and what he owned was a tomb. Okay, you following? What the only tract of land these people owned in Canaan, had the deed for, was a tomb. Now, I like to juxtapose that to Jesus, who basically inherits the world, right? The world belongs to him. The whole earth belongs to him. But the one thing he had to borrow was a tomb. To me, that's profound. I just think that it's playing with us right here. If we read this slowly, it's just like, this is just overload. So I'm fascinated by this whole story, and yes, this is dramatic, but let's see what happens. So they've emptied the land of Canaan except for the flocks and the children, the land of Egypt, except for the flocks and the children and the herds there in verse 8. In verse 9, and there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. I'll bet it was. Verse 10, when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and grievous lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. So add 7 days to the total. We're up to 77 now for Jacob. And when the inhabitants of the land of the the Canaanites, saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians. Therefore the place was named Abel Mizraim. It is beyond the Jordan. That translates to the meadow of Egypt. The meadow. Abel means grassy, so they infer meadow. And Mizraim, the Egyptians. It's beyond the Jordan. Okay. Thus his sons did for him as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron, or bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. I'm going to get it out. Verse 14. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. Okay, we're going to have a little plot twist here. And when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave us this command before he died. Okay, they're lying. It's not like you can get rid of all the deceit, but they're really trying to cover their rear ends at this point. Okay, they're afraid. Verse 17, say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. All right, so here's what they've done. They realize, you know what, now that dad's dead and gone, we don't really have a buffer anymore. And although we think Joseph's a good guy, it just might be that he wants to get a little bit of revenge for all the hell we put him through. And you can hardly blame them, because that's really human nature, right? I mean, you could see it happening. If that had been the turn that was taken in this chapter, who would be surprised? But Joseph weeps. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And I think it was because his heart broke, that they really didn't trust his character. He had shown them nothing but kindness, and he had meant it. Yeah, I'll say that he had come through showing them kindness. At first, he was kind of playing with them, right? Toying with them. So maybe they had a reason to be a little bit suspicious. I don't know. But he's upset about it, or at least his heart's broken. Okay, so verse 18, his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." So they are being very, very meek, very humble. Humility is a new thing for these guys. And Joseph said to them, "Don't fear, for am I in the place of God? But for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Okay? It's a foreshadowing, right? All things work for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Now we're foreshadowing these things that will be threads of truth all the way through the story of our redemption, okay? And he's saying, this all happened to keep everybody alive. You might have meant me some harm at first, but God can redeem things like this. All right, 21. So don't fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years old. Okay, 110 years. If you remember, I had to go back, I think, 3 chapters to get the number. But Joseph was 130, and he called his years short. I keep saying Joseph, Jacob. Jacob called his life short at 130. Joseph here lives to 110. So lifespans are decreasing for sure. All right, verse 23. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the 3rd generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Now I wonder, is he the first brother to die? Or have others already passed on and Scripture just never mentioned it? We don't know. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. There went my light. Well, I've lost my light. You know, I was struggling with this is a new light even. I've been struggling with lights for a while. It's my life right now, but I think you can see well enough. We're going to finish this out because this is a really interesting part of the story. This is the commission of Joseph to remove his body when when Israel leaves Egypt. So it's a prophecy in his death. In my death, I know that you guys are not always going to be here, and when you leave, you're going to take my body with you. Now, here's the interesting thing that a lot of people don't know, and that is the Israelites in Egypt were kind of considered pagans. They were foreign, yes, but they were pagans. Remember, Joseph couldn't even eat with the Egyptians. They were shepherds. The Israelites were shepherds, and they were considered unclean in a lot of ways, low class by the Egyptians. So to them, to the Egyptians, the Israelites were just kind of like idol worshipers. They're not like us. They're a lower class. So there is a word for that in the Hebrew, and that is Rama, which is high, Thaim. Ramathaim. So you can actually research some of this out. I've seen it online because I've double checked this, but a Ramathaim means of the high places. What happens on high places? That's where you worship idols. That's where you do pagan practices. So he would have been known as Joseph of the Aramathaim, Joseph of the high places. All right. So what the instructions are is, when you leave Egypt, take my bones with you. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to hold that up against the life of Jesus, actually the death of Jesus. Remember, I said he borrowed a tomb, and he borrowed the tomb from a man named Joseph of Arimathea. So Joseph of Arimathaim and Joseph of Arimathea, same word, same phrase. All right. What's the instruction? When you leave Egypt, make sure my bones are no longer here in this tomb. Okay? So when did Pharaoh, who is our picture of Satan, when did Satan know he had lost? If we get into Exodus, we'll cover all of this. But Pharaoh knew they weren't coming back when they took Joseph's bones back to Canaan. So Pharaoh knew that he had lost when the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea is empty. When does the devil know he's lost? When the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea is empty. That's when they know that they're never going to get their slaves back. How do you like that? That's pretty cool. There's actually a video on it. It's right here, and I'll explain it better. But that is all of Genesis 50. One, thank you for hanging out with me, even though my lights are going on and off. That's what the money from the Buy Me a Coffee blog goes to. Mostly is equipment, although I shipped some of that off to our folks in Uganda. But I may have to buy yet another light. That's a shame, because I like this one when it works. Hope you guys are having a great week. I think we are going to do a couple of episodes to catch up with The Chosen, and then we're going to dive into Exodus. That's what I want to do. So hope you guys are looking forward to that. Like, subscribe, make sure you hit the bell, or these videos don't ever get presented to your feed. And until next week, hope you have a great, blessed week. Peace out.